One project that I was involved with is in Gloucester. It's the infirmary arches behind the cathedral. It's in a very, very dark environment. It's a fragment of a building. It's like the arches from a previous medieval building. And our treatment for that was to almost light it in a fragmentary manner. You could have floodlit the whole thing in a conventional way, but we just put a small fitting on one side of the arch going along, so it's almost like a sort of half-lit fragment. So that's exactly, you know, the sort of minimal, less is more approach. Rather than lighting the whole thing, you light a part of it, which says something about the nature of the fragment itself.
Often the light designer's job is to choose what not to light rather than what to light. And if you are working in a dark environment, then you don't need very much to create a very large impact. But crucially as well, when we're talking about the balance of light on the vertical surfaces are very, very much more impacting than light on horizontal surfaces. And actually, if you keep horizontal surfaces subdued, it means the impact is greater, the atmosphere is more, and the atmosphere is enhanced with the application of very few and carefully considered controlled light sources.
Yeah, I mean, I just emphasise that as well. That one of the emphasis we put in the book is the importance of the vertical surfaces, and obviously that cuts against many of the conventional ways of lighting public spaces, which is to put bags of light on the floor, and people don't actually notice the floor very much, except when it's overlit. They look at vertical surfaces, they look at trees, they look at landscapes, they look at walls, they look at statuary, things like that. So, you know, it is a constant theme in this brochure, and it's something, you know, we have to keep plugging away at, because it isn't actually prima facie, it's not really self-evident unless you're a lighting designer.
And we were speaking earlier about energy. This is one of the big ways in which you can cut energy, create a bigger impact with less, as you say, less is more. Not only in terms of less equipment, less capital, less running costs, less energy as well.
Well, the project I would mention would be the Duke of York's Square in Chelsea. It's in a fairly busy environment. What the lighting designers did there is that they could see that the perimeter walls within the space were well lit, because there's shops and there's architectural lighting. So the centre of the square is actually lit well below what would be regarded as being the sort of British standard. They use gobo lighting from trees. They use a little bit of uplighting of walls from recessed fittings, and but the overall effect is that people still feel perfectly safe in the centre of that square, feel perfectly secure because of the surrounding lighting. So they've got light there and dark in the centre, which works perfectly well on a public level. And I think that's a lesson again for a lot of ways of lighting landscapes and town centre areas.
Yes, I think many of the projects in the book display that. I suppose one that comes to mind, one of mine, which was Exeter, where we weren't flooding it with light for safety reasons. Deliberately, it was a dark space with beacons of light which led people through it. Light grazed across the paths so that they could, the texture of the environment as well as ambient safety lighting. And maybe another example where you were talking about British standards was Square, where actually there is no direct play of light onto the surface, it's zero. You put a light meter on the deck, it will register zero. But because of the uplighting element, people traversing the space are beautifully illuminated, and it's a very safe environment.
The one that springs to mind that is mentioned in the book is recent lighting at Durham Castle, where through a combination of everything is LED. I mean, the floodlights are all LEDs, which obviously themselves are much less efficient, more efficient than the previous scheme, which was done with metal halide and I think even sodium. And also quite sophisticated switching control system. They've managed to save about 79% of the previous energy load, despite the fact there's far more fittings on the scheme, which is quite an achievement. And also, it saves about 20,000 kilograms of CO2 a year. So that's a really good example of where a combination of efficient light sources and a sophisticated control system can have huge benefits. And yet, the castle is lit much better than it was before. So, it's a win-win situation.
I think just make one comment about complexity of controls. There's a vast range of complexity that can be chosen. If the project demands a theatricality or a kinetic element, then there's controls that can be implemented to deliver that. And Durham is an example there where my understanding is that the client wanted to present the cathedral in a variety of different ways to facilitate a variety of different events that it would be hosting. But it doesn't need to be complicated. And I think sometimes there's a fear of all controls, they're difficult, therefore we won't implement them. There isn't a single scheme that I've been involved in that doesn't have some level of control. As a minimum, it needs to be not on during the day, but also if there are decorative elements that are not going to be appreciated, then one level of switch off lit in the middle of the night, so that the impact is delivered, and that can provide enormous energy and maintenance benefits. It can be very, very simple, but it always needs to be there.
Just that's a question to you, Mark. Conventionally, been in the business for 20 years or so, we would always recommend the turning off of architecture and feature lighting at 11 o'clock or latest midnight at night. Has that changed with the advent of so-called 24-hour cities? Or would we still go and want that level of control?
I always ask my client, and if you've got the facility for control for turning off at 11, you can choose to turn it off at 12, 1, 8, anytime. It's just a simple matter of programming. But I think each projects are changing. There's much talk of the 24-hour day. I think most cities are operating 18 hours still, and still, so that's half of a night year that can be saved. But there's no reason why, if a town or a development or environment changes its use, that the lighting can't respond to that use.